Have you got a service that you don't want to directly expose to the internet or that really doesn't have good security, but still need access to it, let's say through a web browser or through curl or a similar tool? Today, we're going to take a look at using SSH to accomplish that. Let's suppose that you've got a service running with an admin interface on TCP port 80, for example, and it only supports weak or no authentication. Obviously, you're not going to want to expose that to just anybody out on the internet. Likewise, you may not even want to expose that locally on your network. When you're using SSH to do port forwarding, the only thing you actually need to expose is the port to handle SSH. This lets you restrict access to just folks who would normally have access to that server from a command line perspective anyway. When you're dealing with service administration, generally that's going to be a pretty small group of people, so it allows you to be very granular in terms of access. While you could definitely go through and handle this with firewall rules to only permit exceptions to, say, individual workstation IPs, that becomes very cumbersome, especially with more and more people being remote or using home connections in general, which will have varying IPs, or even using DHCP within your office place. What we're going to look at here today is going to be a service listening on port 80 on a machine, and we're going to show that we can access that. We're going to block access through a firewall, and then we're going to show you how you can still access that exact same service using SSH. Okay, so what we've got here right now are 3 terminal sessions. The first one is an SSH session to my remote server where I'm going to be running that service on port 80. The second is my local machine, and the third is also on my local machine. So let's start off by actually running this service that we're going to use. So for today's example, we're just going to use something called netcat, and this just lets me create a listener that's effectively going to be there, and I can do whatever I want with it. So we're not going to look at a web page or anything like that. It's literally just going to allow me to establish a connection and prove that it's working. So I'm going to start netcat in listen mode, and I'm going to run it on TCP 80. So this just sort of sits here. It's waiting for us to give it some input. So we're going to go over to my local machine here, and we're going to telnet to that. Again, not necessarily a practical example, this is just to show that the connectivity is going to work. So we're going to telnet to 10.0.1.10 on port 80. You can see that we're connected now, so I'm going to say hello world. And if I pop back over to my other server, you can see that hello world has shown up there. Likewise, I can say hello again, and goodbye. And we get all of that. And then we can connect and disconnect, and get out of telnet. And likewise, you can see that the connection's been closed. By default, netcat will terminate as soon as the incoming connection gets severed. Let's add a firewall rule that's going to prevent access to this system. So, sudo iptables-a input, so we're going to block incoming traffic. We're going to do that from my laptop here, which is the source IP. We want to block TCP traffic that's going to a destination port of 80. And what do we want to do with that? We want to drop it. So if we do a sudo iptables-l, we'll see that this is the only thing here. So my laptop at my network, and we're going to drop anything going to TCP. So let's clear that. Rule's still going to be there, just clearing my command history. And let's start up netcat again. So sudo netcat-l-p80. So exactly the same setup we had working before. You can see the old connection here. I'm just going to clear my screen. And we're going to try to telnet to that again. And let's see what's going to happen. Trying to connect to 10.0.1.10. But there's nothing. Hello? Nothing shows up. So we're effectively blocked from access. Trying again. Still nothing. All right, let's cancel that. You can also see that my netcat service is still running here despite the fact that we killed the client connection, and that's because it was never actually able to connect. So in my third tab here, what I'm going to do is establish an SSH session, again, to that same server where I'm running the netcat service. So we're going to SSH Gillette at 10.0.1.10, and we're going to create a port forwarding rule that's going to let us access TCP 80 on that machine from our local machine on whatever port we want. So let's arbitrarily use port 8080 just as a comparison point. And we want to, so 8080 is going to be our local port, and then the remote port is going to be port 80 on the other machine. And I should probably add the argument here, -L. So we're going to connect, we're on the remote server, that's fine. We haven't blocked SSH access, so that's expected. Go back here, we still have netcat running, everything's happy. So let's try telnetting to that same IP again. What we should see here is exactly the same behavior. It's not going to be able to connect, right? Try hello, nothing. But this time, let's try to telnet to localhost on the port that we've forwarded our connection to. We're connected, but I'm not running anything locally. Hello? Showing up on the remote server. Goodbye. Again, showing up there. Let's disconnect through telnet, and we can see that netcat has hung up. You can take this concept and apply it to any port. As long as you have SSH access to a machine, regardless of what port SSH is on, you can use that to bind locally to another port and access a remote port as if it was on your local machine. This can be a little complex if you're dealing with applications that use a whole lot of ports, or if you need to access multiple services, but know that you can specify that -L argument multiple times on the command line with SSH. In practical terms, I use this a lot when working with remote systems owned by different companies or different people I'm working with, so that they only need to make one firewall exception, if even that, to give me SSH access. Let's say I'm administering a Hadoop cluster, or really any arbitrary service, and I want to run another service on the side that's going to bind locally on a different port. My options are effectively to use this type of technique, which requires no configuration changes whatsoever for their network team, their server, firewall, any of that, or to go through usually a lengthy change management process. While this isn't necessarily a production type of approach you'd want to take, it can be very useful if you have anything sensitive or entry points into a service that are, let's say, less protected or use alternate authentication mechanisms that you wouldn't want to expose to users. If you wind up using this, I'd love to know about your use cases. Please leave a comment down in the doodly-doo down below, and I look forward to hearing your results with it.